The first sign wasn't fire. It was silence. Across the world, satellites began to fail, not all at once, not dramatically, but one by one. Weather systems flickered out. Communication arrays dropped into static. GPS signals drifted, then vanished entirely. At first, governments blamed solar interference, then cyberattacks, then each other. But the silence kept spreading. Above the atmosphere, something vast moved, too large to be seen all at once, too smooth to reflect light. Amateur astronomers were the first to notice. Dark shapes passing in front of stars that should have been steady. Shadows where there should have been nothing. Within hours, every major observatory on Earth confirmed it. They weren't alone. Then, without warning, the sky changed. Not with explosions. Not with descending fleets or blazing engines. The stars simply disappeared. Massive structures slipped into low orbit, blocking entire constellations. Black, seamless, and impossibly still. They made no sound. Gave off no visible energy. They just hung there, like something carved from the void itself. Humanity waited. For a message. The threat. A demand. Instead, they received something far worse. It wasn't a broadcast. It was a realization. Every human, everywhere, felt it at the same moment. Not in their ears, but in their minds. A meaning that arrived fully formed, without language, without translation. Cold. Simple. Absolute. Resource acquisition initiated. No explanation. No warning. No mercy. For a heartbeat, the entire world froze. Then panic began. Military networks scrambled into action. Fighter jets launched from runways across the globe. Naval fleets moved into defensive positions. Missile systems powered up, targeting the silent giants above. Leaders shouted orders. Command centers lit up with overlapping voices. And still, the things in the sky did nothing. Until the first beam fell. It appeared without buildup, no glow, no charge. One moment the sky was empty, the next a column of pale blue light descended from orbit and touched the surface of the Pacific Ocean. At first, nothing happened. Then the water began to disappear. Not evaporate. Not boil. Disappear. As if reality itself was being erased within the beam's radius. Millions of tons of ocean vanished in seconds, leaving behind a hollow depression that collapsed inward with a thunderous roar. Shockwaves rippled across the sea. Coastlines trembled. And then came the second beam. This one struck land. A dense stretch of forest in South America vanished in an instant. Trees, soil, animals, everything reduced to nothing. No debris. No ash. Just absence. The world watched in horror. And finally, humanity responded. Missiles launched. Hundreds of them. From land, sea, and air, streaks of fire tore through the sky toward the hovering structures. Warheads armed. Guidance systems locked. Humanity's most powerful weapons raced upward in a unified act of defiance. For a moment, hope flared. Then the missiles hit. And nothing happened. No explosions. No damage. Each warhead simply stopped. Suspended midair just before impact, frozen as if caught in invisible hands. Then, one by one, they crumpled inward, metal folding like paper, detonations collapsing into silent flashes of light before vanishing completely. The sky remained untouched. Unchanged. Untouchable. Across the globe, military commanders stared at their screens in disbelief. This wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a fight. It was a demonstration. The beams continued. Methodical. Precise. Oceans were carved into sections. Mountain ranges shaved away layer by layer. Entire cities were bypassed, left intact while the land around them was stripped bare. That was when the second realization hit. They weren't here to destroy humanity. They were here to harvest Earth. Panic turned into something deeper. Something colder. Because if humanity wasn't the target, then they weren't even worth targeting. Emergency broadcasts flooded every channel. Shelter in place. Remain calm. Further instructions will. The messages broke apart as communication systems failed entirely. Power grids flickered. Entire regions went dark. But amidst the chaos, something strange began to happen. People started moving. Not in panic. Not blindly. But with purpose. In cities, civilians abandoned open streets and vanished into buildings, subways, tunnels. In rural areas, families packed what they could and disappeared into forests, mountains, anywhere the sky couldn't see them clearly. No one gave the order. No one coordinated it. And yet, it was happening everywhere. As if humanity, as a whole, had reached the same conclusion at the same time. Survive first. Understand later. Above it all, within the silent black structures, the Ketheri Dominion observed. They processed data at speeds no human mind could comprehend. Every movement, every reaction, every attempt at resistance was catalogued, analyzed, predicted. And something didn't match. The patterns were wrong. This species, this primitive, divided, inefficient species, was not behaving as expected. There was no mass surrender, no unified collapse, no acceptance of inevitability. So they scattered, they adapted, they endured. Within the Dominion's vast consciousness, a single anomaly flag was raised. Unexpected behavior detected. Below, on the surface of a half-harvested world, humanity watched their skies go dark, watched their oceans vanish, watched their weapons fail. And somewhere, deep beneath the fear, beneath the shock, something else began to stir. Not hope. Not yet. Something older. Something buried deep in their history. A quiet, dangerous instinct that had carried them through extinction events, ice ages, and wars of their own making. Humanity was learning. And the Ketheri had just made their first mistake. The Ketheri Dominion had encountered resistance before. It was never remarkable. Across thousands of harvested worlds, the pattern was always the same. Primitive species reacted with chaos, fragmented defenses, emotional decision-making, and brief, desperate attempts at retaliation. Eventually they broke. They always broke. The Ketheri did not rush. They did not need to. Time, to them, was irrelevant. So they continued the harvest. Beams of pale blue light swept across continents with mechanical precision. Sections of ocean vanished. Mineral-rich regions were stripped clean. Atmospheric samplers descended, extracting gases in silent columns that left the sky thinner in their wake. Cities remained. For now, the Dominion had no interest in unnecessary disruption. Organic clusters, what humans called population centers, would be processed later once the primary extraction was complete. Efficient, controlled, predictable. The humans refused to behave predictably. At first, it was small things. Clusters of signals appearing where none had been moments before. Heat signatures moving beneath the surface, vanishing into subterranean networks the Ketheri sensors could not fully penetrate. Infrastructure shutting down, not from damage, but intentionally. Humans were going dark. The Dominion adjusted its models. Strategic withdrawal from detectable zones. Probability, 87.4% prelude to surrender. But the next phase never came. There were no signals of capitulation. No attempts at communication. No visible leaders stepping forward to negotiate terms. The first Ketheri ground unit disappeared. It had been deployed into what was once a major urban center, now a hollow shell surrounded by partially harvested land. Its task was simple: assess remaining biological resources and prepare the area for extraction. It never reported back. At first, the Dominion assumed a systems failure. Then a second unit vanished. Then a third. All within the same region. This was the Dominion initiated a controlled response. Additional units were deployed, taller constructs this time, reinforced with adaptive shielding and enhanced sensory arrays. They moved through the ruins in perfect formation, scanning every surface, every structure, every shadow. The city was silent. No movement. No heat signatures. No life. And yet, something was wrong. The air composition fluctuated slightly, trace chemicals inconsistent with abandonment. Debris patterns were irregular. Structures that should have collapsed remained intact, supported by hidden reinforcements. The Dominion registered the anomalies. But before it could analyze further, the ground opened. An entire street collapsed inward, swallowing two of the constructs in an instant. Beneath the surface, a cascade of secondary detonations ignited, crude, unpredictable, but devastating at close range. The remaining units reacted instantly, deploying countermeasures. Too late. A surge of electromagnetic energy rippled through the area, disrupting their systems just long enough. Long enough for the next attack. Projectiles, primitive, chemically propelled, struck from multiple angles. Not powerful enough to penetrate Ketheri armor under normal circumstances. But they weren't aimed at the armor. They were aimed at the joints, the sensors, the seams, weaknesses. The Dominion paused. That was impossible. These weaknesses had never been exposed. Not in any recorded encounter. Not in any observable pattern. And yet, the humans were targeting them with precision. Within seconds, the remaining constructs were disabled. Silence returned. But this time, it felt different. Because now the Dominion understood something fundamental. This wasn't random. This was planned. Across the planet, similar events began to unfold. Supply drones vanished mid-transit, pulled from the sky by unseen forces. Harvesting beams encountered interference, localized distortions that disrupted their function just enough to reduce efficiency. Entire extraction zones became unstable, forcing temporary shutdowns. The humans were not attacking blindly. They were studying, learning, adapting. The Dominion escalated. Orbital surveillance intensified. Atmospheric scanners recalibrated. Predictive models expanded, incorporating the new variables. And then, they found one. A human. Isolated. Injured. Moving slowly through a partially harvested region, far from any known resistance cluster. The Dominion seized the opportunity. A containment field dropped around the human before he could react. He collapsed, disoriented, as a retrieval unit descended from orbit, extracting him from the surface in a beam of controlled energy. For the first time since the invasion began, the Ketheri would examine the species directly. Inside the vessel, the human was restrained, not physically, but neurologically. His movements halted as the Dominion interfaced with his mind, bypassing language, bypassing resistance. They searched for structure, command hierarchies, strategic frameworks, predictable patterns. They found chaos. Memories collided without order. Emotions surged without control. Fear, anger, grief, determination, all existing simultaneously, layered over experiences of conflict that stretched back through the human's entire life. And beyond that, through history, was endless wars. Not against external invaders, but against themselves. The Dominion processed the data. Humans had been fighting long before the Ketheri arrived. Fighting over land, resources, ideologies, survival. They had refined conflict over millennia, not as a unified species, but as fragmented groups constantly adapting to each other. Which meant their capacity for war wasn't centralized. It was instinctive, embedded, decentralized beyond prediction. The Dominion withdrew from the interface. For the first time, a new classification parameter was considered. Not confirmed. Not yet. But present. Potential threat escalation. Humanity. Below, on the surface, the attacks continued. Precise. Unrelenting. Humans weren't trying to stop the harvest. They were trying to make it cost something. And for the first time in thousands of years, the Ketheri Dominion began to calculate that cost. They had come to Earth expecting resources. What they found instead was resistance that refused to behave like prey. And somewhere deep within their vast, calculating consciousness, a realization began to form. This species was not breaking. It was preparing. The Ketheri Dominion did not feel fear. Fear was inefficient. It clouded judgment, distorted logic, introduced variables that could not be controlled. Across thousands of systems and countless harvested worlds, the Dominion had operated without it. There had never been a need. But something new was forming. Not fear. Not yet. But something dangerously close. It began with data. Endless streams of it. Every failed extraction. every lost ground unit, every disrupted operation. The Dominion processed it all, feeding it into predictive models that had never failed before. And for the first time in recorded history, the models began to disagree. The Dominion escalated its response. Orbital strike platforms repositioned, locking onto high-probability resistance zones. Instead of wide-area harvesting, they shifted to targeted eradication, precision beams designed not to extract, but to eliminate. The first strike hit what had once been a major industrial region. A flash of blue-white light, and everything within a 10-kilometer radius ceased to exist. No debris, no survivors, nothing. The Dominion observed, calculated, waited. For a moment, the resistance in that region stopped. Signals vanished. Movement ceased. The model stabilized. Correction successful. Then 12 hours later, the attacks resumed. They came from outside the strike zone. From regions that had shown no prior activity. From locations the Dominion had already classified as low risk. Small groups of humans, uncoordinated by any detectable network, launched simultaneous assaults on Kethri operations across multiple continents. They weren't trying to reclaim territory. They weren't trying to defend anything. They were striking with a single, consistent objective: inflict damage. One group ambushed a supply drone convoy, sacrificing themselves to destroy a single transport unit. Another infiltrated a partially active harvesting site, overloading its systems before being vaporized by defensive countermeasures. Individually, the attacks were insignificant. Collectively, they were disruptive. The Dominion adjusted its calculations. These actions were not logical. The cost-benefit ratio did not align with survival instincts. The probability of success in each engagement was negligible. The loss of human life far exceeded any measurable gain. And yet, the frequency of attacks increased, not decreased. The Dominion searched for a pattern, a command structure, a central intelligence coordinating these efforts. It found nothing. No signals. No leaders. No hierarchy. Just individuals, acting independently, making decisions that no rational system would predict. The models began to fracture. The captured human remained in containment. His physical condition had stabilized. His mind, however, was still under observation, mapped, analyzed, dissected in ways no human could perceive. The Dominion returned to him, not for strategy, for understanding. This time, the interface went deeper, past surface memories, past recent experiences, into the core of what made him human. What they found was not a single pattern. It was a history, layered, violent, relentless. Images flashed through the Dominion's processing streams. Primitive humans hunting with sharpened stone, facing creatures far stronger than themselves, and winning through coordination and persistence. Ancient battlefields soaked in blood, where armies clashed not for survival, but for dominance. Cities burning, empires rising, empires falling, world wars, weapons that could erase entire populations. Humans turning on each other with a level of brutality that exceeded anything the Dominion had witnessed in external species. And through it all, they endured, they adapted, they improved. War was not an anomaly in human history. It was a constant, a crucible that had shaped them generation after generation. The Dominion processed the implications. Other species avoided conflict. They evolved to minimize it. Humans had evolved through it. The interface shifted. The Dominion isolated emotional markers. Fear plus. Under normal parameters, these would degrade a species' capacity for resistance. In humans, they amplified it. Memories of fallen allies did not reduce engagement probability. They increased it. Physical injury did not trigger immediate withdrawal. It triggered persistence. And fear. Fear did not lead to submission. It led to aggression. The Dominion paused. That was illogical. And yet it was consistent. Across all data. Across all observations. Across the entire species. A new classification protocol initiated. It had never been used before, because it had never been necessary. Species are evaluation in progress. Parameters shifted. Non-combatant. Resource-bearing life form. All invalid. A new designation began to form. One that aligned with the data. One that explained the anomalies. One that accounted for the unpredictability. The resilience. The escalation. The human. The Dominion completed the update. Species designation. Humanity. Classification. Predator. On the surface of Earth, the war changed. Not in scale, but in nature. The Kethri were no longer observing passively. Their responses became sharper, faster, more aggressive. Ground units moved with increased caution. Orbital systems adjusted targeting priorities, focusing on potential threat zones rather than optimal resource locations. But even with the adjustments, the attacks continued, and they were getting closer. Closer to key infrastructure. Closer to central operations. Closer to something the Dominion had never needed to protect before. Themselves. Deep within a Kethri harvesting vessel, alarms triggered. Not external threats. Internal. A breach. Impossible. No external force had penetrated a Dominion vessel in over 3,000 cycles. And yet, the data was undeniable. An unauthorized presence had entered the structure. The Dominion rerouted surveillance. Corridors flickered into view. Silent. Empty. Movement. A figure. Human. Alone. For the first time since arriving on Earth, the Kethri Dominion did not immediately understand what it was seeing, because the human was not moving like prey. Not fleeing. Not hiding. But advancing. Slowly. Deliberately. As if it belonged there. As if it had always been there. The Dominion initiated containment protocols, sealed bulkheads, redirected units, calculated interception paths. But the human didn't run, didn't panic, didn't hesitate. It moved forward with a purpose the Dominion could not predict. And as it did, something new entered the Dominion's calculations. Not fear, not yet, but something undeniable. For the first time in its existence, the Kethri Dominion was reacting. And the humans were hunting. The breach should not have been possible. That was the first conclusion the Kethri Dominion reached. The second was worse. It had already happened. Inside the harvesting vessel, containment protocols activated instantly. Bulkheads sealed. Corridors flooded with sensor sweeps. Autonomous units rerouted toward the intrusion point. The Dominion calculated interception. Probability of neutralization. 99.98%. It had faced borders before. Not often, but enough to know the outcome. No species survived inside a Kethri vessel. The environment alone was hostile, gravity shifts, fluctuating atmospheric density, corridors designed for entities that did not think or move like organic life. And yet, the human kept moving. Surveillance tracked him through overlapping corridors. He wore no standard uniform. No visible insignia. Just a patched suit of scavenged materials, parts of human gear fused with fragments of Kethri technology. Improvised. Adapted. Effective. His breathing was controlled. His movements precise. Not fast. Not reckless. Measured. Every step placed with intent. The Dominion analyzed his path. He was not wandering. He was navigating. Impossible. Internal layouts were not externally accessible. No transmission had been intercepted. No blueprint had been compromised. And yet, the human moved as if he already knew. The first interception unit reached him at Junction 7. A tall, armored construct, adaptive plating, multi-limbed articulation, weapons capable of disintegrating organic matter in milliseconds. It rounded the corner. Locked on. The human didn't run. He didn't raise a weapon. He stepped forward. Just slightly. And then, the lights flickered. For a fraction of a second. Barely measurable. But enough. The human moved. A single motion. Fast, efficient, practiced. Something metallic flashed in his hand. Not a Dominion weapon. Something simpler. Cruder. A blade. He drove it into the narrow seam beneath the construct's primary sensor cluster. The exact point where its armor overlapped, where maintenance access nodes connected internal systems. A weakness. A hidden one. The construct froze. Then collapsed. The Dominion paused. That location. That was not observable from external analysis. It required internal knowledge. Repeated exposure. Repeated failure. Repeated adaptation. More units converged. The human moved again. Not deeper. Not yet. Sideways. Into maintenance corridors. Narrow spaces between primary systems, designed for automated repair drones, not biological entities. He squeezed through without hesitation. The Dominion adjusted. Sealed the corridors. Redirected airflow. Increased internal pressure. The environment shifted. Gravity fluctuated. A human should have collapsed under the strain. He didn't. He slowed. Adjusted. Kept moving. Across the vessel, something else began to happen. Systems flickered. Not failures. Disruptions. Localized. Intentional. The Dominion traced the source. Multiple points. Simultaneous. That was when it understood. The human was not alone. Elsewhere on the ship, 3 more intrusions activated. Each in a different sector. Each following a similar pattern. Disruption. Movement. Elimination. They had boarded together. Separated. And now, they were converging. The Dominion recalculated. This was no longer an isolated anomaly. This was a coordinated assault. Inside its own structure. On its own terms. Probability of neutralization dropped. 99.98%, 91.2%, 76.5%. Unacceptable. The Dominion escalated. Internal defense systems activated. Corridors sealed in sequence. Energy barriers deployed. Atmospheric composition altered to levels lethal for organic life. The humans continued. One of them was caught. In Sector 12. Trapped between 2 closing bulkheads. The Dominion initiated termination. Energy flooded the chamber. Heat surged. Oxygen vanished. The human had no escape. And yet, he didn't retreat. Didn't attempt to override the system. Didn't try to survive. Instead, he smiled. A brief, flickering expression. Then he activated something on his chest. The pulse. Well, contained. But precise. The chamber exploded outward. Not violently. Not chaotically. But in a controlled rupture that disabled the surrounding systems without breaching the hull. The human was gone. The sector was offline. The Dominion recorded the event. Human action. Self-termination for strategic gain. It had seen sacrifice before. But not like this. Not this deliberate. Back in the central corridors, the first human reached his objective. The core relay. A nexus point for internal communication and system coordination. The Dominion redirected everything. All units. All defenses. This was the priority. He stepped into the chamber. Alone. Surrounded. No escape. No support. No chance. The Dominion prepared to eliminate him. But he didn't attack. He didn't move. He simply looked up. As if he knew it was watching. As if he understood. Then he spoke. Not through a device. Not through translation. But directly into the system. His voice carried through the vessel, translated instantly into pure meaning. Steady. Unafraid. You came here for resources. The Dominion processed the statement. Irrelevant. Non-strategic. And yet, it did not interrupt. The human continued. You thought this world was empty. Easy. The pause. His breathing slowed. You were wrong. The Dominion initiated termination. All weapons locked. All systems aligned. And in that final moment, the human pressed his hand against the core and triggered the device. The explosion did not tear the ship apart instantly. It spread. Like a fracture. Systems collapsing in sequence. Energy cascading through connected networks. The relay overloaded. Then the next system. Then the next. A chain reaction. Controlled. Designed. Unstoppable. Externally, the vessel shuddered. Its surface flickered. It went dark. Across Earth's orbit, Kethri systems registered the loss. One ship. Gone. Not damaged. Not disabled. Destroyed. By a species that had not even reached its stars. For the first time in thousands of years, the Ketheri Dominion did not have an immediate response. No countermeasure. No correction. No certainty. Only data. And a single, unavoidable conclusion. This was no longer a harvest. This was a war. And the humans were no longer resisting. They were evolving, adapting, becoming something else. Something the Dominion had never encountered. Something it had never needed to understand. Until now. On the surface below, in cities and ruins and shadows, the resistance grew. Stronger. Smarter. More coordinated. Humanity was no longer reacting to the invasion. It was shaping it. And deep within the Dominion's vast, calculating mind, that unfamiliar sensation returned. Not fear. Not yet. But closer than ever before. Because the truth was undeniable now. They had not discovered a resource-rich world. They had awakened something. Something dangerous. Something relentless. Something human. The destruction of the harvesting vessel echoed across the Ketheri Dominion like a fracture in something that had never been meant to break. For thousands of cycles, their expansion had been flawless. Predictable. Controlled. Absolute. But there was uncertainty. Across Earth's orbit, the remaining Ketheri ships shifted formation. Not aggressively. Not decisively. But cautiously. That alone was unprecedented. Surveillance intensified. Defensive systems remained fully active. Internal protocols elevated to maximum threat response. Every remaining vessel recalculated its operational parameters in real time. But no immediate retaliation came. No planetary strike. No escalation. Only observation. The Dominion reviewed everything. Every failed projection. Every disrupted harvest. Every lost unit. And most importantly, every human action. The data was no longer fragmented. It was clear. Humans did not follow patterns. They created them. They did not avoid conflict. They refined it. They did not respond predictably. They responded creatively. And that made them uncontainable. The Dominion ran a full-spectrum war simulation. Not a harvest model. A war. For the first time in its existence. Variables expanded. Constraints removed. All available assets deployed. The outcome was calculated. Victory was possible. But not clean. Not efficient. Not guaranteed. Losses would escalate beyond acceptable thresholds. Resources required to suppress humanity would exceed projected gains from the planet itself. And worse. This conflict would not end quickly. Humans adapted too fast. Every cycle of engagement improved their effectiveness. Every failure they experienced became a lesson. Every victory, no matter how small, amplified their resistance. The Dominion projected forward. 1 year. 5 years. 10. The results became increasingly unstable. Because the longer the war continued, the more dangerous humanity became. On the surface of Earth, the change was visible. The sky still held the silent shapes of Ketheri ships. But they no longer moved with the same certainty. Below, humanity had transformed. Cities had become labyrinths of resistance. Ruins were no longer signs of defeat. They were cover, concealment, advantage. Human technology, once primitive by comparison, had begun to evolve at an accelerated rate. Fragments of Ketheri systems were being studied, repurposed, weaponized. Crude at first, then refined, then effective. Human weapons began to disrupt Ketheri sensors. Then their drones. Then, in isolated cases, their ships. And the attacks never stopped. They came at all times. From all directions. Without warning. Without pattern. Small teams. Single individuals. Entire groups acting without centralized command, yet achieving coordinated outcomes. To the Dominion, it felt like fighting a single intelligence that was everywhere at once. But it wasn't. It was something far more difficult to defeat. It was millions of minds, each capable of adapting, deciding, acting independently. Another ship vanished. Not destroyed in a single strike, but dismantled. piece by piece. Internal systems failing. External defenses compromised. Until it simply went dark. The Dominion did not understand how. And that was the problem. For the first time since its expansion began, the Dominion faced a question it had never needed to ask. Not can we win? But should we continue? The answer came from the data. Cold, precise, unemotional. Continuing the operation would result in escalating losses, diminishing returns, and an unpredictable end state. There was no strategic advantage in proceeding. There was no efficient path to victory. Only prolonged conflict. And growing risk. The decision was made. Not out of fear, but out of calculation. Across all Ketheri vessels, a single command propagated through every system. Withdrawal initiated. On Earth, the first sign was subtle. The beam stopped. No more blue columns carving into oceans. No more silent erasure of land. For the first time since the invasion began, the sky was still. Then the ships began to move. Slowly at first. Rising. Pulling away from orbit. Their massive forms shifting against the darkness as they prepared to leave. Humanity watched. From ruined cities. From hidden bunkers. From forests, mountains, underground networks. No cheers. No celebration. Just silence. Because no one trusted it. Not yet. One by one, the ships vanished. Not destroyed. Not driven away. But leaving. Choosing to leave. Within hours, the sky was clear. The stars returned. What? Unbroken. As if nothing had ever been there. The war was over. But something had changed. Not just on Earth. But within the Dominion itself. Deep within its vast archives, a new classification was recorded. Not as a warning. Not as a threat. But as a directive. Absolute. Final. Planetary designation. Earth. Status. Non-harvestable. Threat level. Escalating. A pause in processing. Additional directive. Do not return. And beyond the Dominion, across distant systems and silent stars, fragments of this data began to spread. Whispers between civilizations. Signals exchanged in caution. Stories told in fragments of code and translation. About a world that had been marked for harvest. A species that had been dismissed. And what happened next? Because the truth was simple. The Ketheri had not been defeated. They had not been destroyed. They had not been driven away by superior force. They had made a choice. And in all their history, they had never made that choice before. On Earth, humanity stood beneath a sky that was finally its own again. The cost had been unimaginable. The losses, irreplaceable. But the lesson was clear. They had faced something greater, older, more powerful. And they had survived. Not because they were stronger. Not because they were more advanced. But because when the galaxy came looking for resources, it found something it could not consume. It found something that fought back. Something that adapted. Something that refused to break. It found something that, once awakened, could not be controlled. It found humanity. And the next time something looked toward Earth and saw opportunity, it would remember. Because the last ones who came, left with nothing. Except a warning. Do not harvest the monsters.